third is Suarez. Goodell comes running in. He's under it, makes the catch. Here's the throw to the plate. It's in the air. He is out! Cameron Rick hangs on! Oh, man, what a play! Deep to right field. Way up there and way out! Second
And welcome back to the Stupid Monday podcast. We're going to make this quick because we both have fantasy football drafts in an hour. So this is not going to be long, but on the bright side, it's a positive one. The Phillies take 3 out of 4. Actually, we haven't spoken since before the Astro series, right?
I believe so. Yeah. The last thing that I said was that they needed to go 5-2 that week against the Braves and the Astros for me to be fully back in. And they went 5-2, and the losses weren't even that annoying. Obviously, the Taijuan Walker game against the Astros is what it is. The offense was a little bit frustrating that game, but then they came in. I don't want to say, dominated that Braves series from an offensive standpoint, but they specifically Castellanos did what they needed to do in order to kind of put a stranglehold on the division. So yeah, we haven't talked since then, and like you said at the start, it's been pretty positive since we last talked.
Yes, they're 7-2 since we last spoke. Just swept a 2-game series up in Toronto, which they usually don't play well up there, so that's a huge positive. And they're doing it while pretty banged up, and we're also did it in a series in which a starter didn't get out of the first inning for you. Tyler Phillips. I mean, Taijuan Walker is really bad. Tyler Phillips is a cheaper, younger version of him.
Yeah.
It's not there. And the thing is, he was getting lit up in AAA too before they even brought him back up here. I think like his mojo just kind of wore off after that complete game shutout, which was wild that looking back on it, that happened against our first place team in the Guardians. I think I'll mark that down as the craziest thing to happen this year. And we had a Weston Wilson cycle and a couple other wild things happen this year so far. Nick Castellanos has 4 walk-off hits, which they have all these walk-offs and none of them are home runs, which is really interesting. They have 12 or 13, I think, and none of them are home runs, which is super, I don't want to say interesting, but rare that you just have that many walk-offs and not a single one involves a home run.
Yeah, it's interesting. Going back to Phillips, I mean, I kind of talked about it before the All-Star break, but especially now as you're trying to figure out what that fifth starter looks like, and you obviously don't want to go to a shortened rotation before the season. I think it kind of, I mean, even though Phillips was atrocious the other night, I think it'd kind of be a slap in our faces to throw Walker back out there every 5th day after everything that we kind of just went through, especially like the last month with him since he came back from the injury. I said it before the All-Star break, going into that Oakland series. At this point in September, especially like Abel, you really have, I mean, there's definitely standings to lose, but like in relatively speaking, when Phillips is this bad and Walker has the sample size of being that bad, I know it was weird because you couldn't necessarily call up Colby Allard because of the way that it works with when you send somebody down and have to call them back up. But like if you're in a pinch again where you can't necessarily use Allard yet, like just give Abel the one start, see what you have there. The starts since the All-Star break haven't been horrible in the minors. Especially, I know we're going to talk about standings here in a little bit, but like depending on who the opponent is, obviously you have pretty big games coming up with Milwaukee and the Mets in terms of what the division and the bye look like for the playoffs. But like if you run into these things where it's like against the Marlins on the weekend or something like that, it's what, a 4-game series in Miami?
Yep.
So one of those games is going to be that fifth starter. Like they're not going to do it, but like it wouldn't. You can't trot Phillips back out there. I know they just brought Nick Nelson up, so maybe they're going to go the opener route and do that. But depending on what happens the next few days until you get to that spot, I wouldn't hate Abel. I don't think it's going to happen, but my logic's still kind of obviously you don't have the trade boost that you did in July when we wanted you to do it, but you're up 1.5 on Milwaukee, 2.5 with the tiebreaker, and you're up 7 games or 7.5 in the division, 6.5, something like that. A relatively big number for 24, 25 games left to play. Obviously, again, 7 of those are against the Mets in the last 17 games of the season. We saw what happened with that in 2007 on our end. So I don't, I'm not sitting here saying play with your food in terms of mess around and experiment while the division's not locked up yet. But you did your work early. You have a little bit of a cushion instead of ruining the bullpen in one game because you're going an opener or Tyler Phillips. At least see what you have in Abel.
Yeah, I think it's worth it. Obviously, you can't get much worse than what Phillips just did because he literally didn't get out of the first inning. And I think like we kind of talked about some of the leads they've built up. Like I think the division's pretty safe, especially if the Braves were to lose tonight. That goes to 8 with 23 to play. It's very hard to blow that. I know there kind of comes a point here where the Mets actually become the team to like think about because the Phillies still have to play them 7 times and they're 8 back. So, like I know like at one point you kind of pushed the Braves out of view, which I think you kind of did this past weekend. It's now actually the Mets. I don't think either is a huge threat, but it's now the Mets are a bigger threat than the Braves actually, even if the Braves are ahead of the Mets in the standings. But you've done enough there to have the lead there. We'll see with Milwaukee, but the thing really is maybe not so much winning and losing the games by the 5th starter. It's did we damage the bullpen in the process? Because they clearly did the other night. Now they were lucky enough that they didn't have to use Hoffman and Estevez, still won the game, and then came back and were able to use those guys today, and they were nails and they won the game. So it did work out, but obviously, Taijuan Walker giving you 3 with 2 runs was whatever. Banks and Alvarado are more than fine in what they do. So all the way around, like just as long as you go like 4 or 5 innings and just totally nuke the bullpen, whatever the 5th star does from this point on is more than okay. So I guess kind of now that that's talked about, just kind of moving on to a couple things to watch. Obviously, the bullpen has been really good. Them kind of getting back in this groove has been the bullpen getting hot again too. Kerkering, Strom, and Hoffman all seem to go through a rough patch at the same exact time, which didn't help, but they seem to be back. Alvarado's back off the restricted list, which kind of happened between episodes for us here. I still don't know what his role is going to be come playoff time. Banks is okay. I don't know how much high leverage he's going to get. I still think he's a middle inning guy, but is he now in replacing Alvarado in that middle relief role is kind of going to be something to look at. So those are 2 things there with the bullpen. But other than that, I think it's really just offensive injuries are the biggest concern in this last 23 games.
Yeah, I agree. Even when he's pitching, I don't fully trust Alvarado yet. I'm a little surprised. I know the money was a lot, but the guy that I had on my perfect deadline, the Taylor Rogers waiver wire thing, he slipped through everybody on waivers. I know it's a lot of money to give to a reliever, which, I don't particularly love, especially when there's no guarantee that you're going to get the Taijuan Walker money off the books. So I get why they kind of passed on that regard, but I don't know who, like, I guess it's Alvarado. I'd probably rather Alvarado than Banks because, again, I say this every episode, but I just see Brad Hand every time Banks pitches and I just can't get myself to trust that in the playoffs. But I guess Alvarado's the second lefty, but I'm not gonna feel good about it while he's pitching the entire time. And yeah, the biggest concern for me, especially with those four guys at the back of the pen kind of humming right now the way that they are, it's definitely the offensive injuries. Like you said in our group chat the other day, I do think that if rosters didn't expand, I think we would have saw Bohm go on the IL.
Yeah.
I know you and I both would have rather see Harper go on the IL after that swing last night. We're recording on Wednesday, so after the swing on Tuesday night when his elbow tweaked a little bit, according to Thompson, and then he gets hit by a pitch on the other elbow the next day and pulled from the game for a contusion. If he went on the IL after last night's swing, he only would have missed one of the Milwaukee and New York games, which is really the not to say the only thing, because you have to take care of business, but there's really 10 games left in the season. Those are the 10 games that you really have to handle business at. And you really, I mean, I know he hasn't been the Bryce Harper that we've come accustomed to. He's like a month without a home run. I think he's been a little bit banged up as it is, and then this definitely doesn't help the cause. But he's still, I think his OPS since August started. I know that the start of the second half wasn't particularly great, but the OPS as of late is near 800 or 850, I think. It's been a lot of doubles. He hit 300 in that stretch. So, like, what started off really ugly out of the gates in that road trip kind of turned into a nice second half for Harper in terms of everything but home runs. Like, you're still missing that in your lineup. It's a lot. You know, we talked about at the start of the year, and it's come back a little bit lately, how deep this lineup is. Like Marsh, we've kind of ripped him a little bit lately, but he got on base 8 times in 2 games in Toronto. He had a really good series. Stott is putting up okay numbers. So like the length of the lineup starting to come back, and a lot of that goes away when Bryce Harper is out of the lineup. Even if he's not going, you know, completely right, the name and what he gives you in terms of effort, he's slapping singles, so slap doubles the other way, even when the home run power is not there. It goes away a lot, and teams can kind of pitch around Schwarber, who decided to hit everything for a home run in the Toronto series. So it might play a factor that as soon as he starts to get hot, he starts to get walked, and then, you know, takes it upon himself to start chasing more pitches, and he can fall out of that pattern. So a Harper injury, the Bohm injury is not great. And, you know, I don't necessarily need to see Edmundo Sosa every single day.
Yeah, so Sosa's good to an extent, but man, some of his at-bats are very, very ugly. Definitely don't trust him really in playoff spots. I don't think you really see him too much, but yeah, I'd rather just shut Harper down for 10 days, let this kind of heal, get him back for the last kind of pivotal games that matter, and then he has a week against the Cubs and the Nationals to kind of get right and get ready for the playoffs. That's kind of the route I would take, especially with how hot Cody Clemens is, because Cody Clemens can actually be a pretty impactful bat for a week or two. So he's hot right now, so I'd rather ride that now while he is there instead of trying to keep Harper around like at 75%. Cody Clemens goes cold and the Harper's still 75%. I just rather would ride the Cody Clemens heat wave right now if you can.
Yeah.
So yeah, just getting. I think maybe if Bohm is good to go tomorrow, they do put Harper on the shelf. I just don't think they wanted both those guys out right now. With kind of, I know Schwarber got hot, obviously super hot up in Toronto, but Turner hasn't been super hot. JT hit a home run today, but he wasn't super hot. Stott's been cold again. He had 2 doubles the other night, but it still doesn't look right. So I just think because a lot of the other players aren't going well right now, they didn't want to risk losing both Bohm and Harper in the lineup. So I could see that. but I think, Harper, maybe it's good to just take 10 days off. Obviously, Miami's given them some troubles, but Ranger, Nola, and Wheeler pitch 3 of the 4 games down there. So I think I could go without Bryce Harper against the Marlins in that case. And then you go back home where you play really well and you face a Rays team, which is, maybe not a surprise, but sold at the deadline and struggling. So I just think that you can get by without him for 10 days. It's not going to hurt a ton. So I think you've done enough there. Hopefully get Bohm back, get him right, get him hot again, because he was kind of, even before he was hurt, he was kind of cooling off a bit. But, they ended up winning the game on Monday or on Tuesday night, but they easily could have lost that game for the simple fact that Mundo Sosa left like 8 guys on base. And it's just like, if that's Alec Bohm instead, he's probably not leaving 8 guys on base just because of how good of a runners in scoring position hitter he is. So it's not sustainable with Sosa, really. I think I'd rather, if I had to pick combinations, I'll take Bowman Clemens over Harper and Sosa right now, just in terms of how banged up Harper is. So, let's do that. I think that's a way better path to go. Just get him right and get ready for the playoffs, because everyone else, seems to be ready to go health-wise at least.
Yeah,
so
agreed. And hold on. Looking back at it, I know I think I said this to people at work today, but it's so funny looking back at that trade with the Tigers. Like Veerling's, fine, but Veerling and Maton for Soto and Clemens, and like Clemens is our cornerstone aspect of that. Like even when we traded for Soto, he was an all-star closer, but he was always like our second or third like lefty out of the pen. Like they never just like slid him into the closer role like they did with Estevez, or really trusted him in like too many high leverage spots. And now Clemens is like the utility bench guy that, comes in at third, comes in at first. I think he's played like an inning or 2 for us at second. Like he really is kind of like a Swiss Army knife in terms of call-ups. And the 2 at-bats that he had on Tuesday night in that big comeback, to come off the bench and have like an 11 pitch at-bat that you work into an RBI ground out, I believe, that he hit pretty hard. And then to have the double and extras, like it's really hard to come in and pinch hit. And it's really hard to do that against relievers too, that are, throwing very fast with a lot of movement. So I think it's definitely something to look at going forward. I definitely expect to see Cody Clemens on the playoff roster. And I think, obviously it's not I don't think it's the, Greg Dobbs or Matt Stairs kind of pinch hit, bench bat that we've seen on these championship teams that the Phillies have had. But it's definitely something to keep an eye on, especially as, if there's a situation where Bohm's injury lingers or they're having to play Sosa a little bit because Stott's struggling. Like you have that lefty bat off the bench that has shown the ability to come in and pinch hit and work at bats late in games when he has
to. Yeah. So definitely added bonus. I'm interested. We'll get into that later. I'm interested to see what they kind of do with the playoff roster, because all of a sudden it seems like they have too many hitters to put on a playoff roster. So I'm a little interested to see who gets left off, because I feel like Sosa has to be carried because he's pretty much your only backup middle infielder. But then what happens with the Clemens, Weston, Wilson, Hayes combo? So I am interested to see how that's going to go. So before we send this one off, I do want to quickly, it'll come up for me, look at the standings here. And all right, we can do that later. That'll go away. There we go. So for the division, obviously the Braves and the Mets are still going to play tonight. So that could go to back down to 7 for Atlanta, or could go up to 8. And kind of the same with the Mets. It could go to 7.5 or 8.5. The Mets have gotten hot again. They were cold and then got hot again. So that's something to keep in mind, because the Phillies do have to play them a lot. Hopefully they get cold again.
They swept the White Sox. Like they are hot. They're winning games, but also like the weekend series, it was a 3 or 4 game like sweep of the White Sox.
Right. So yeah, I mean,
So that's kind of
division
gift
looks
wrap.
kind
And
of over.
the Braves have the Rockies and somebody bad this week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's just switch over to the wild card. It'll load here. Gotta start the AL. So yeah, the Phillies right now are in the second spot. They hold the tiebreaker over Milwaukee. Obviously, now I want to know what happens if Milwaukee sweeps Philly and they end the season with the same record, because they'd be 3-3 versus each other and have the same record.
I don't know. I don't know what
Yeah.
the second tiebreaker is.
Yeah, I don't either. So that's something to keep in mind. Hopefully they can at least win one in Milwaukee. We don't have to worry about that. Hopefully Milwaukee loses tonight, because then the Phillies would kind of be not so much in the driver's seat, but a little bit of a cushion there. With that, Milwaukee's played Milwaukee's played, well, they'll play tonight, so they'll have played one more game. So I'm not exactly sure how that evens up, but something to keep in mind there. This is interesting. So pretty much it's down to the Braves and the Mets for the last spot. The Diamondbacks and the Padres look like locks at this point. The Cubs made a run. I think they're going to cool off here again.
Yeah, they played some bad teams. The Cubs did.
Yeah, I think they're going to cool off again. But the 6th seed in the NL playoffs looks deserving this year. I know they've had some, the Phillies went to the World Series, weren't a very high, great record team. And then, of course, you had like the joke of the Marlins that were the 5 seed last year or whatever. I think all 6 teams that make the NL playoffs are actually warranted this year. There's no Mickey Mouse team in the playoffs, I feel like, in the NL this year.
Yeah, agreed. I think the Dodgers have 22 games left. Nobody's probably gonna get to 100 wins, but I think we've seen every team in the NL show stretches of dominance that I think warrants them, like you said, no like oddballs making the playoffs. Like the Brewers have had really the best offense in baseball for a month. The Dodgers, obviously, we know what their roster looks like and what they're capable of. The Padres might have the best bullpen in baseball. So like if their pitching staff's really good, and Machado and Profar have been elite this year, at least Profar specifically. Jackson Merrill's probably going to win Rookie of the Year. He's been out of his mind. And then the Diamondbacks, Ketel Marte's up there in the MVP. They have good pitching. The bullpen's solid. Sewald's been this year, but they're still. Corbin Carroll's been like the best hitter quietly in the second half of the season by an OPS measure. I think he leads the league in home runs since July. He has like 13 or 14 home runs. I think he's up there. Obviously aside from Judge, he's kind of carried their offense a bit in the second half. So yeah, all these teams are more than deserving. And I think, looking at it, I don't know how I'd feel as the 1 seed getting into a 3-game series with that Braves pitching staff, with Sale probably winning the Cy Young. We hit them pretty well this weekend, but it still seems like we just can't really get to Schwellenbach. So I'm assuming they throw him in, and Lopez has kind of dominated us. So, I don't love a short series with Sale, Fried, Lopez, and Schwellenbach. The Diamondbacks are probably, in terms of roster-wise, the worst out of all of them. But, they seem to, going back to even 2021, we swept the Mets out at home with Wheeler's complete game on Doc's Day, and then we went to Arizona with the division lead. Granted, it was the beginning of August, but 4-game sweep there. And then, since then, they've kind of had our number dating, the playoffs last year, obviously. This year, the series in Arizona didn't go too well. The series at home against Arizona didn't go too well. So, they're probably the worst roster, but they're almost the team that I want to see the least out of that wild card. But the Padres might have the best roster, but we seem to have their number. So I'd probably rather the 2 seed. But, I think the difference between us approaching the bye and the Braves the last few years, they've kind of had the division locked up by, June, July, at the latest, early August.
Yeah.
And they've kind of credited the bye for being the problem for them, but they really haven't played meaningful games. So the fact that, 7 out of our last 17 are against the Mets, who could be 8.5 back or 8 back going into that, there's meaningful games for us in September, and it'll give us a chance to get healthy. So I don't necessarily worry about not getting the bye if it means avoiding Atlanta initially.
Yeah, I mean, I just really want to stay out of this best of 3 series because I feel like all the pitching staffs in that could give the Phillies problems in a short stint. So I'd like to stay out of that this year just because of that too. Just because, as I mentioned, I don't think there's kind of a weak link team in it like the past couple of years there kind of has been. So rather just stay out of that and see what transpires with that and which 2 teams come out of it and which one the Phillies end up facing. But I mentioned this too. I don't mind being the 2 seed to LA because 1, LA chokes a lot, so the chances of them even getting to the NLCS is kind of low. And 2, the Phillies just seem to play really well out in LA. So for those 2 reasons, if we're the 2 seed and the 1 seed is LA, it doesn't scare me as much as if it was any other team.
Yeah, for sure. Especially looking at it, I know Yamamoto just threw a rehab start. Glass now, I think he's healthy. I don't know. He just normally gets hurt, so I don't even know with Tyler Glass now. Kershaw just got hurt, I think, with a bone spur in his foot. Gavin Stone's been pretty hit or miss. Their pitching staff is very gettable. Obviously, Kopech has been borderline unhittable since they traded for him. I don't really know what Jack Flaherty's done since they traded for him, but looking at those roster or those teams that are in the playoff hunt, well, if we just go with the 6 that are in the playoffs now, I'd say in terms of starting rotations, the Dodgers might be 5, and overall pitching staff, I might move Milwaukee ahead of them just because of the history with Milwaukee's bullpen being pretty effective. But the Dodgers pitching does not scare me in the slightest.
Yeah, I agree there. They're just a lot of unhealthy guys, a lot of guys that even if they get healthy, I don't know how much they could give you in the playoffs. Like Kershaw, old, banged up. Bueller's banged up. Glasnow was recently put on the IL, wasn't he too?
I thought so.
Yeah, so just a lot of guys banged up. So they're gonna be scary next year. I think when Ohtani can pitch and all these guys are healthy, but this year I think you can. Sure. I think you could get them this year.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, so let's wrap this up. But before we do, so next 7, 4 in Miami, and then 3 at home against the Rays. I guess 4-3, 5-2 is fine considering the way they're playing. So I would take either of those outcomes. Obviously, they don't play too well in Miami, but we'll see. This Miami team's bad, but all those random guys were so hot when they were up here. I don't know if they've cooled off, but I really like for that to stop.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same way, 4-2. Not to say tread water, but I'm pretty focused on those 10 games against Milwaukee and the Mets, and they're professionals most of the time. They seem like professionals, but I'm sure they're kind of looking ahead at those games too. So I kind of hope for 5-2, but probably expect 4-3. I'm a little bit more optimistic, like you said, with the way our pitching lines up in Miami for that series. But, you never know what to expect when they go down there to that, especially with how bad the Marlins are and the lack of exciting players that they have. It's going to be as quiet as ever in that stadium. Football's back, so people are going to be even less involved with the Marlins because the Dolphins seem to be pretty good this year, and the U is back. So it's like the Marlins are like the circus in town.
Yeah.
So that stadium is going to be empty.
Right.
I know they've talked about it in years past about creating their own energy there. And, maybe this is the series where we finally give Stubbs his credit this season for being the boombox and beer guy and making some energy
Man.
down in that lifeless place. But I'd probably lean 4-3, hope for 5-2. Just don't have a losing record in these 7 going into the biggest stretch of the season.
Yeah, that would be nice. We'll definitely talk before that stretch starts. Hopefully get some good health news, but we'll be back next week after the Rays series to kind of talk things over, because it'll be a good time to evaluate and see what the standings look like, because then that 10-game stretch pretty much is the season. So we'll definitely talk then. But until then, let's hope for some more wins.